Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Finance. The government has currently been dodging questions about Gas Plants 2.0. There are almost $80 million that belong to ratepayers that are still missing. The minister knows that electricity companies built ratepayers for over $260 million through ineligible expenses. And the minister knows that there is still nearly $80 million worth of ineligible expenses that have yet to be repaid to the ratepayers and taxpayers. So, Mr. Speaker, my question is clear and direct to the Minister of Finance. Will he commit to this legislature to recoup that money on behalf of Ontario ratepayers?
Minister of Finance.
Minister of Energy, Mr. Speaker.
Minister of Energy.
Speaker, we take market oversight of our electricity system very seriously, and any instance of wrongdoing will be investigated and dealt with accordingly, Mr. Speaker. And we are confident in the Ontario Energy Board and our system operator to run an efficient, reliable and fair electricity market for ratepayers across the province. There are strong measures in place under Ontario's electricity market rules that allow the system operator to identify and take action on false claims. Under these market programs, our system operator has the authority to conduct audits of claims made by generators and other market participants, and if needed, Mr. Speaker, our system operator can impose fines and seek the recovery of amounts that were incorrectly claimed. And I know, Mr. Speaker, in the past, Goreway was an example. A record $10 million fine was imposed, and $100 million in payments were recovered from the generator's total claims, and $168 million of the $200 million has been claimed so far.
Supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, back to the minister. We know that one of those companies gaming the system was the government-run OPG. We know that they are doing this at the same time that hydro rates were skyrocketing, seniors couldn't afford their hydro bills, were being disconnected, and families were afraid, petrified, to open their hydro bills. How did the government respond? They ignored warning after warning after warning. And then they rewarded, this is unbelievable, Mr. Speaker, they rewarded the former CEO of OPG with a bonus of $500,000. A $500,000 bonus while the system was being played like a fiddle. Taxpayers, ratepayers abused. So my question, Mr. Speaker, is who signed off on this $500,000 bonus while OPG built the system and ratepayers had their funds stolen?
Thank you. Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. OPG is Ontario's low-cost provider of electricity, and they take the responsibility to Ontarians very seriously, Mr. Speaker. OPG works every day to ensure they act in an appropriate and fully compliant manner that respects the rules that govern Ontario's electricity system, Mr. Speaker. With regard to their participation in the real-time generator cost guarantee program, OPG believed they were acting in compliance with the program's policies as set out by the system operator. OPG has said in a statement they did not intentionally misuse the market rules, and OPG was not sanctioned as a result of their participation in that program. The audit did determine that there were differences in understanding of what constituted eligible costs under the program. So in respect of some of what those eligible costs were, OPG repaid certain claimed amounts after discussions concluded what were eligible costs. OPG promptly repaid all of the amount to the ISO in full in 2015. And the matter was concluded.
Final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, again to the minister, the response that some of the ineligible expenses have been repaid isn't good enough. The front bench of the Liberal caucus has sat idly by while this has all happened. They let these companies claim expenses that were completely ridiculous. You hear stories of expensing scuba gear and raccoon traps. Scuba gear and raccoon traps. I'm asking about expenses like that in the legislature, and they have the audacity to say everything is fine, everything is rosy. And for the life of me, and this is the reason I asked the question to the Minister of Finance, is I can't understand why 4 ministers of energy and 2 premiers have allowed this to happen.
The member from Essex is warned. Finish, please.
Mr. Speaker, 4 ministers of energy, 2 Liberal premiers have been asleep at the switch when this has happened. Will the Minister of Finance tell us how this has been allowed?
Thank you. Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think everyone in this House would agree that abuses within the system are completely unacceptable, Mr. Speaker, and that's why our system operator has investigated those market participants, and where significant wrongdoing was present, Mr. Speaker, compensation has been recovered and returned to the ratepayers. $168 million of the $200 million in ineligible costs have been recovered by the IESO, Mr. Speaker. The $32 million that is remaining, those are still in discussions. An example, Mr. Speaker, is Goreway. Goreway was caught gaming the system, Mr. Speaker. They were fined a record $10 million, Mr. Speaker, and they recovered $100 million of those costs, Mr. Speaker, and they brought those back to the ratepayers. We all agree that the abuses of the system are unacceptable. That's why we continue to ensure that we've made the changes so things like this will never happen again, Mr. Speaker.